Hi, everyone. Welcome back into the White Collar Lenses Show. I'm your host, Aaron Percoco. I am a registered mental health counseling intern in the state of Florida. Pro tip, if you do not want to have to say that mouthful every time you introduce yourself to somebody professionally, do not get licensed here because you have to. It is a rule. So, today's topic, I wanted to address privilege, but more as an intimate concept rather than it being this overarching topic that kind of worms its way into everything that I do professionally and that systemically white men do in this profession and everywhere else. Um, there were a couple of ways I wanted to tackle this concept, none of which felt like a good way, truthfully. This is more of an episode of me trying to convey privilege, which hopefully you already know in some ways, like how it exists within our intersectionality, how it permeates the therapeutic space. But for those who don't, or who need a reminder, or who just want to hear me gab and do this shit, I wanted to address it from a couple of different angles, and how, especially as therapists, it is going to inherently present itself in our work. Um, and so I took some time and just tried to figure out like where is my privilege within the therapeutic space. Just for me specifically. Other than the color of my skin, other than the anatomy I was birthed with. Um, the first thing I wrote was money as a whole, but specifically for school, like getting an advanced degree getting any degree is a privilege, but getting an advanced degree specifically has a lot of privilege tied to it. Like getting a master's degree, getting a doctorate degree, those take time, those take money, those take you needing extra help more often than not, especially in this economy. Um, for me, it was I lived with my mom for 2 years while I finished school to mitigate cost. Um, Not everyone has the ability to do that. Not everybody can use their loans for anything but rent. Like when they have to go through FAFSA, through Pell Grants, or through um, private loans, things of that nature, unsubsidized. Um, those are things that people don't think about, but like those are an inherently privileged thing to do. To even accrue a loan in itself, you that takes a certain amount of like, do you have credit? Do you show up in a way that's like, do we want to give you money? Like when you're talking to a bank, do you have financial literacy, which is usually tied to, do you know about money? Did you grow up with money? Do you understand how you present with money to the world? Do you know how to interact with money in a quote unquote healthy way that people would encourage you to? So the fact that you're in the position you are anyway means you have privilege in some way, shape, or form. Like you had to access the resources, whether you had enough money set aside because you either saved, you had the ability to save, or you had the ability to access a loan, you had the ability to get money from family who helped you through that process. Like being in the position you are as a therapist, like I don't know the landscape of program tuition across the country or across the world, but for me, my program was about 40 grand that um that was in total across six semesters. Um so that's a considerable amount of money that you have to have, especially today, to be able to put aside to say, okay, I'm going to pay back on this in this amount of time, to have the ability to pay back on it fairly quickly, unless you get some form of forbearance or forgiveness in some way. Everyone's different. This is my situation that I had going into school. Like I had time. I didn't have to work during school because rent was not an expense I had to pay for. And that's an inherent privilege to be able to do this work, to take time for yourself and be like, all right, self care is important. My time is important, my energy is important because that means I have to use that to give back to the people that I'm working with. Not everybody has that. Like it is also a privilege to be like on the spectrum that I am, as opposed to having to work your way through school, to really have to tough it out, to really have to put a lot into it. Like it doesn't have to be inherently, oh, you are privileged versus not privileged, but that's where this is mine. This was my process of doing it. And I understand not everybody's is going to be the same way, but for me, as a lot of my counterparts are going to experience, is a similar situation, like people helping us, people wanting to support us through this journey. Not everybody's going to have access to that. Um, and I mentioned time and energy, like not having to work through school was extremely beneficial. Like I just got to go home and I got to focus on homework. Got to focus on interpersonal relationships. I got to focus on everything outside of school, essentially. I got to focus on my own healing journey. I got to go to therapy. Really, I got to go to a nutritionist. I had a lot of resources that I could utilize during that time where others may not have had that ability. So, already, like off the bat, several instances of my own therapeutic journey, like in school, that a lot of people probably didn't have access to in order to utilize and to help further their own ability to work in this space. Um, Once you're in your career, like you are actively salaried more likely than not, unless you went my route and you are working self pay, you're working private practice, whether through a group practice or you're working through your own practice. So you are like, depending on your pay structure, depending on how either you made it or your group made it or whatever rate that your agency has decided you are worth, you are actively getting paid more per hour than the vast majority of people. So there is a lot of privilege saying like, oh, I only made 45 bucks an hour. Like that is astronomical compared to the minimum wage where we're still at in so many places. Some places it's still like 7.25. Other states are putting in legislations where it's more 15. But like when you put that in the landscape of I make three times as much, and this is just community mental health, like I make three times more than somebody making good minimum wage. Um, that's an inherent privilege in itself too that we don't think about. And if you are somebody who is working 40, 60 hours a week, that is not an inconsiderable amount of money. Now, we can go into a different topic of that is way too many hours to be working with humans. And are you able to take care of yourself with that kind of work rate, uh, no matter what the pay scale is? I personally don't think it's conducive, but some people want to do that because it means a lot to them to work with that many people in usually more disenfranchised life situations. But for me, I knew I was like, I don't have the energy, I don't have the ability to withstand that for that amount of time, to work with that many people and build 60 relationships with people, because some are going to fall through the cracks. Like I'm going to inherently not work as hard for other people just by proxy of it's too much. It's There's too many people. I can't do that. So that's why I went a different path. Um, but again, there's privilege in getting to do that on my own too. Like I had people lined up to refer me, essentially, like people with my internship wanted to say, hey, this guy's starting a private practice, you should go with him. Like connections, the ability to make connections is inherently privileged as well. I am in a place because of privilege, like for the not for the most part, entirely. Like this is a privileged lifestyle in some ways. I don't always think of it that way, but it is. And it's hard. Um Not hard. But this is one I'm wrestling with. Like I have a hard time conveying my privilege to people. Like it exists on me. Like I enter the world being privileged. I go outside and know that I am. Um, I'm not used to having to talk about it with people. Like, I don't know how many people are actively watching, listening, but to convey it in this way of like, I know how it exists for me, and not every white guy is going to understand it the same way that I do. This is just how I have internalized it. This is how I have understood it for myself. Um, and sometimes I'm not going to be able to articulate it the way that I want to. Like, this is an instance where I'm like, this topic makes sense to talk about, but am I going to be able to convey it in a way that I feel is appropriate? I'm not entirely sure. I already know my energy's different, like just from how I'm vibing, just from how I'm existing. Um, so this is me working through that too. Like, this isn't just I know everything about being white and being in this space. Far from it. Like, it's uncomfortable to talk about. It's uncomfortable to confront everything you have at your disposal that so many people don't. And for me and somebody in my situation who was like, I actively don't feel like I'm in a good place in terms of finance or the way I want my business to look right now. It doesn't matter. Like, it's still like you still have that. I still have that. Whereas as a lot of people don't. So if I am coming across in a way that feels, I'm like, where is he coming from? Where is he at with this? Like, personally, I'm just uncomfortable. Like, it is these are uncomfortable conversations to have. I'm looking at three different cameras right now, but like, conveying it to another human who looks like me and has a similar life history as me, it's still not comfortable. It's still not easy to talk about with each other. But like, we have to try. we have to we have to have hard conversations. We have to make peace with what we are. We have to make it better, I hope. But like, I want to make it better. We don't have to. I want it to be better for so many people because by having the hard conversations, it makes it easier for everybody else when we can finally sit and talk and process this shit and be like, okay, yeah, we're in a very different spot than a lot of people by our own doing on purpose. But we don't want that to be a thing anymore. Like, we are trying to, for the people who are listening who want differently for this community, for therapy in general, for the patriarchy to disband, like, these are the conversations we have to have with each other. It's not comfortable. I'm not we're not all going to do it perfectly. There are people who are actively better at articulating this than me. But part of my fear revolves around not getting to convey things perfectly because I'm a perfectionist and I want to be perfect. And that's why I won't do certain things because if I'm not going to do it perfectly, I don't want to do it because it's not worth my time. It's not worth my energy. Well, this is something I care about that I'm not going to be perfect at. And it's important to me that I have an honest dialogue with myself as well as the people listening or watching and saying, I don't have all the answers and I never will. This is merely where I've been, where I'm going, and hopefully having enough introspection to convey it as a level of kindness and forgiveness with myself and for the others around me who look like me. So, rant over, I don't know. But it's just, it's a lot. It's a lot to process. It's a lot to talk about. And some aspect of this is inherently therapeutic for me because I have to externally process it. Otherwise, I will go bananas. Um, so in the event you watch this 3 years down the road, just know I'm okay. Like, I'm doing better. But back to the things I see in terms of privilege. Um, Not so much from a or from a therapeutic lens, but I, as a human, do not have the same fear response or the same threat of fear as a person of color in the United States, as a BIPOC person in the United States. Like, I don't go out of my home and actively have to think about, am I going to wind up in handcuffs today for a misunderstanding? Am I going to um, am I going to get into an altercation? I'm referring specifically to police because that is one that is just at the heart of so much of America. Um, but also, like, I don't worry about going out and getting assaulted in several different ways. Like, I'm not looking over my shoulder. I'm not actively entering the world in a state of fear. I'm entering in a state of dysregulation because that's how my brain works and processes external stimuli. But I'm not actively afraid of the world around me. And that is something we take for granted immensely as cis men, like cis white men specifically. But we don't go out in the world and say, mm, I need to mind my manners. I need to be on my best behavior. If I fuck up, I might end up in prison or dead. Like by just a misunderstanding or a minor altercation. We don't have that. And that is something I don't think a lot of us think about actively, like, because we don't. We're not metacognating about that. So that's a massive aspect of privilege. Like, you get to just go walk out into the world and, for the most part, quote unquote, be okay. And that is a disparity that I would love to end. Like, I know how it feels to be worried and panicked, but never to the degree of having to constantly watch my back and feeling like I'm constantly at risk of losing my life or that somebody I love is constantly at risk of losing their lives. So these are not concepts that we talk about in our circle because we're usually the one perpetrating them. But as a therapist, especially, you are going to inherently work with people who have different backgrounds than you and who actively live different lifestyles than you and have to live with those fears until, and I say until things change, but like, just because shit changes doesn't mean your psychology, your neurological makeup has changed along with those new rules and those new social understandings. Like, trauma exists without the social change. Like, that's just an aspect of your brain after a certain point. It's not easy to just be like, okay, yeah, we put all this new legislation in, everything's better. No, that's going to take a lot of work if it ever is to change on that person's end, and for them to feel better, some semblance of wellness. It doesn't just get better with us doing our part. So when you're in the chair and you're thinking, like, where does my privilege lie? Like, where does my privilege show up in therapy? It's like you being in the chair is an aspect of that. And as someone who likes to break things down far more than most people care to, like understanding yourself in every possible aspect and scenario of your lived experience, that is groundwork that is exhausting, but it is sometimes incredibly necessary because we can see ourselves in different parts of our day to day that we've never have before and be like, wow, this is empathy building. As a therapist, that's completely necessary to have. Is I don't necessarily understand where that comes from for that person, but if I was in that person's situation, dear God, yes, I would be in a similar state of panic, distress, whatever. Like, we don't just get to turn it off. It has to exist within the room. Like, we have to know why this person's distressed. Like, that's why cultural competence is so important. We're never gonna know what it's like to be on the other end of these things that people are talking about for the most part, but we have to make a concerted effort. We don't just get to sit there and be like, okay, yeah, tell me all your problems. Like, that person may not even feel comfortable sharing with you until that dynamic is addressed in the room. Like, and that might be a thing that is stifling you from having effective work with the human in front of you because you're just like, yeah, everything's good, right? And like, no, like that. I had people ask, like, after the election, like, how are you? I'm like, I'm not good. I'm not having a good day. And for people I didn't know as well, who asked, oh, what's going on? Like, The fact you ask is a component of okay, like that's not gonna be a conducive relationship anymore because you had to ask why I'm distressed after a national event, something like that. And if you're not thinking about things from that perspective, like you're gonna lose the person in front of you, and you're gonna not make them feel inherently safe, which is so much a part of what therapy is feeling like you can connect with a human one on one despite intersectional differences and just say like, okay, I see you, you see me. I want to connect with you and I want to work through these things with you. It's a choice. It's it becomes symbiotic in so many ways. Um there has to be buy-in on both ends. So ways to mitigate that in the future, just like if you're somebody who has only just started doing the work, like if you're in practicum or you're in your internship, um, just being upfront with it. Like I am somebody who has minimal knowledge of like how he interacts with the world right now. I want to learn and I want to be present with you through that. Um, but I'm gonna be straight up about where I'm at in that journey. And if this is a relationship you want to consider moving forward, knowing that is going on, awesome. It's not that person's job to give you grace. It's not that person's job to hold your hand through that. And if they want somebody who is going to be more approachable or culturally competent or just has a better or a more conducive energy to them at that time, then that's totally okay. Like you're just not in a place where that person's going to work best with you. It's a reciprocal exchange. Like there has to be give and take both ways. Just self disclosure is a big part of it too. Like for the especially for my trans clients I work with, like, no, I don't know what that's like to feel that way and to present that way and to have to hide yourselves in the way, especially in Florida, like hiding who you are in the ways that you do. Like, but I am somebody who fights immensely for the rights of every human and who wants nothing but peace and camaraderie and open dialogue and change. And sometimes it's not even good. That's not even good enough. Um, but knowing that like people want to hear that you give a shit, essentially, they just want to know that you're trying, and that's better than most at that point. So, not to say like using your self disclosure is everything about the therapy. Like, I just want you to know I am doing so much for white people right now. Like, I'm really trying to mitigate every like. That's not what they're asking of you. And it's really selfish to go into it like that. Like it's acknowledging this is who I am. I haven't understood myself in this way prior for a majority of my lifetime, but I am doing the work to want more and to want more for myself, to want more for other people, and wanting to acknowledge like big elephants in the room and not be like, "Oh, why does that come about?" Like it's we have to try. And there's better ways to do it than others, but it's about effort more often than not. Like this isn't a hand holding situation. This isn't like let me coach you through being culturally competent and how to be a good white man. Like you're not. They can't do that for you. You have to be the one that takes it upon themselves to do that. And they don't need to know that that's what's going on necessarily. Just presenting authentically, presenting in a way that you feel is conducive with who you are. And if that doesn't jive with the other person, you can't change that. You can't fight to be culturally competent enough for that person. So I say this as I say it because I understand and I've been the person in both of those situations who has done it poorly and who's done it well. Um, and you are gonna fuck up like at some point. It's gonna be the wrong thing to say, and loving yourself through that mistake and acknowledging, okay, I move on and better from that, and I will be better from that. It doesn't make it sting any less, but it's important. So I do this. I'm sending love to all of you watching. Um, don't forget to give yourself a hug. Like, implement self forgiveness when possible. That's really it. Like, I just want better for us. I want better for you. And yeah, I don't have much more. But hope y'all take care. Hope you had a good couple of days off if that's where you are in America, or if you're outside of America, you have no concept of Thanksgiving other than colonialism. But hope everyone got some rest. So take care. Bye.